The industry has always had a few problems.
I call them cookie cutter toy towns. Undeveloped sites are a risk to all stakeholders.
Mark, you told me this podcast was going to be under an hour.
Welcome back to ProBuild 360 TV. Welcome to the Onsite podcast. Our guest today is Mark Wakeford. Mark is the chairman of the National Federation of Builders and the chairman of EvoEnergy. Mark's got 30 years experience in construction and property development, in care homes and other types of construction. So Mark, thanks for being with us today.
No, well, Michael, thoroughly looking forward to it.
Wonderful. So you've got your background really is in civil engineering. You're a fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineers, yes?
I'm a member of the institution, fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers. Yes, so trained as a civil engineer with a large international firm of civil engineers, although only worked in the UK with them. Mm-hmm. So yes, trained as a civil engineer.
And that, a lot of big infrastructure projects and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, that's right. So we did lots of big projects, but so I suppose I cut my teeth really on roads and bridges around the southeast of England.
Not the M25, I hope.
Not the M25. No, it's going up at much the same time, but it wasn't the M25.
Wonderful. The construction industry is the biggest industry in the UK, depending on how you parcel it up. How do you feel about the general health of the industry at the moment?
The industry is definitely the biggest industry. If you look at enthusiasm and excitement,
oh gosh,
can't be beaten.
Absolutely.
The industry has always had a few problems. It's always been a mixed bag. So there's some really successful and companies doing really well. Those are particularly vertically integrated ones like your own, where they have a bit more control of what's going on and what's happening. Mm-hmm. I do think at the moment, though, the industry is struggling in various areas, and I'm not a great fan of huge generalizations, and we have to be very careful about saying, mm-hmm. Oh, the industry is in doom and gloom, or the industry is really good, or
that's
whatever.
Both at the same time, I would say.
It is, yeah. But certainly, I think we're in a time at the moment where volumes in the general contracting market are going down. House building's got its own challenges at the moment. Whether they're going to be going down or massively going up, we're going to wait and see.
Yeah.
In terms of construction, though, volumes appear to be easing, mm-hmm. And we've still got skills crisis, and we're in a highly fragmented industry.
Yeah.
And the fragmentation doesn't help when you've got, you're struggling to try and find a uniform approach to solving some of these problems.
Yeah.
And that's really coming home to roost in some cases now.
Yes. I think that maybe the bigger an organisation gets, the less central control it has over quality and so on. And
yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, having worked for a very large international company, the quality was absolutely, that's what you were there for.
Okay.
The culture of the business was, we deliver quality. And that was rammed home from you from an early stage.
Okay, so where do the problems come from then? So, because I see, particularly like in house building, you've got the industry being consolidated into more and more, less and less big organisations, with the SMEs really, really struggling. And in my experience, I think that the quality suffers when you're looking at those real volume, 1,000-unit projects.
I think housing's always, the volume house builders would always have some quality issues on site.
Right.
And I think that's probably the nature, perhaps a bit more in housing than it is in perhaps a large general contracting. I think the challenge we have at the moment is predominantly around the skills.
Right.
We're not training enough people in this industry. And the thing about skills is that we still have the same number of bricklaying companies, plastering companies, M&E companies. What we're finding is the number of skilled people within those businesses is getting spread thinner and thinner.
Right.
And so the people we actually have and we rely on within those businesses are getting squeezed.
Yeah.
And because we haven't been training enough people, there's not enough people coming up through the ranks to replace them when they retire. And so they're getting squeezed even more.
So other than apprenticeships, which obviously we have had in place for many years, and I think the industry uses as much as it can, is there anything else apart from the apprenticeship programs that we should be using as a strategy to fix that?
Yeah, so there are lots of training programs, and I mean, what I would advocate is getting companies close to their FE colleges,
Right.
because you'll suddenly find the FE colleges can do all sorts of things for you,
Yeah.
which don't necessarily just mean an apprenticeship.
Right.
So we've got T-levels coming through,
Yes.
and T-levels will be a great thing for most businesses to support. There are things in my, so one of my hats I wear is in the Solar Task Force.
Yeah.
And we've been running something called a sector-based work academy program. It's run by the Department of Work and Pensions,
Got it.
but it's where any company in the country can go to their local Job Centre Plus and say, we are struggling to recruit these skills in this area. And Job Centre Plus will then create a course as a local training provider, generally an FE college, and they will run a course which you as the employer can influence.
Yeah. Okay.
They will then put their job seekers or anybody on benefits through that course without any loss of benefits to those people.
Right.
And all you as the employer have to do at the end of it is to interview that person. And the intention is you'll take them on because you said you're short of those jobs and people. But there's no obligation to take them on. You're just obligated to provide an interview so that they know whether they've succeeded or failed in the training. Now, we've been doing this in the solar sector, and we've got. I mean, I've personally been absolutely staggered at the competence and the quality of the people coming through.
That's brilliant.
I've sat there with my fellow managers, and we said, well, what the hell are these people unemployed for in the first place?
Yeah.
The caliber has been absolutely phenomenal.
Oh, that's really good.
And so, that's an opportunity which people just don't know about.
Yeah.
But is open to anybody in the
hopefully
sector.
they do now.
Well, let's hope.
Let's hope.
Let's get everybody to hear the podcast.
That's right. In terms of manufacturing and supply chain and so on, do you think that things like steel and concrete or gypsum products and these sorts of things can be localized in any way? Because at the moment, a lot of it is globalized, shall we say, for want of a better word.
So I think the answer is probably not. Your steel fabric, we're trying to keep a UK steel industry going, and that's going to reduce the need to import steel and import steel.
Yeah.
Now, we've moved to getting rid of the blast furnaces, which is how you create virgin steel, and we're moving now to the electric arc furnaces. Electric arc furnaces work on scrap metal.
Right.
So we're now into recycling all the scrap metal we've got to try and keep that metal in the UK and not increase the requirements for metal we need. And it's quite heartening to see the sort of work that Chorus is doing. So they've got the opportunity to reduce the carbon emission of their steels significantly by moving to scrap. So we're talking almost of a factor of 10 is possible. Whether it's going to be achieved in the next 10 years, we wait and see. But a factor of 10 reduction in carbon is a massive reduction. So our own indigenous steel people are doing quite a lot about that.
Yeah.
There's work around about reducing the carbon content of concrete. And cement is another, as you know, cement's a very high emitter for carbon across the world. I think they've got more challenges to reduce that.
Yeah.
But there is certainly opportunity to bring that down and reduce the amount of cement that we need within our buildings.
Yeah.
I think though what it actually means is we're going to be moving to far more timber.
I was just about to ask, is timber frame buildings?
Yeah. So mass timber buildings, where we're seeing timber, multi-story, 10 plus stories of timber, is now feasible. The technology and the design capability exists to put the high-story, multi-story timber frame buildings up in place.
Is there a trepidation from the industry itself though because of Grenfell?
Well, I think Grenfell's taught us a number of things, and one of them is around competence. And so, are we both designing these buildings and are we erecting them, installing them competently in accordance with the designs? And I think we in terms of mass timber, the multi-story high-rise timber buildings, we have the competence to be able to design them. We actually have the competence then to build them as well. But it is going to need a different approach to life. We're going to have to be far more focused on the quality. We're going to have to be far more focused on making sure that the people installing them are competent and know what they're doing. The law of unintended consequences in timber frame is massive. You get the breather membranes wrong.
Well, I was just going to say, I know that you have experience in timber frame buildings. What about the ventilation side of things and the breathability of the buildings? Because they can be incredibly energy efficient, the buildings themselves as well as the construction materials. But the air changes per hour can get really, really low. Are you starting to get into the realms of mechanical ventilation and that sort of stuff?
I'm a great fan of mechanical ventilation. We were building houses in the 80s, 1980s, that had mechanical ventilation in,
Yeah.
and phenomenally low in costs of heating because they were so well insulated, triple glazed, highly insulated, highly sealed buildings, but with mechanical ventilation.
Okay.
So we were building three bedroom houses. And I remember to this day, because we showed people around Energy World around them, they were costing £46 a year to space heat.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Even in 1986, that was nice and low. In 1983, that was very low cost of doing it. So mechanical ventilation, particularly run through heat exchangers, plate exchangers, is a really efficient way of working.
Yeah.
And the cost of running the fan is a bit like the air source or the ground source heat pumps. The energy conversions are really very good.
Yeah. Well, if we could do that, then imagine what we could do now. We should be able to build houses at passive house levels and be able to heat them for nothing really.
Yes, I think passive house. I'm a great fan of the concept of passive house. I think passive house was really designed for a Central European climate.
Right? Okay, yeah.
We've got a slightly wetter, warmer climate over here. I do worry. For passive house, I do worry that we need some thermal mass, or we need the ability for buildings to lose heat.
Yeah.
And that's going to become increasingly important.
Yeah.
We had a heat wave across Europe in 2006. I think 19,000 people died in Paris due to heat stroke because of poorly designed, poorly ventilated buildings because of the heat that was growing in it. So properly designed buildings with some thermal mass. And whilst that ought to be concrete, or it's generally concrete, there are technical ways of solving that problem now. But it is important to be able to get the heat out of these buildings as well as it is to keep it in.
So we should be brave enough to champion timber frame.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely. I'm still personally, and I'm not a designer in this area, but I would need some convincing that putting vulnerable people into large timber frame buildings where you may have problems keeping them cool is something that needs to be looked at. But for general housing, general schools, everything, it's a good form of construction. And most of the solutions, there are solutions out there to solve most of these problems.
So obviously we have a newly formed Labour government in place. What would you say that the government's focus should be on in relation to our industry?
Well, I'd like to think they've got a focus at all on our industry would be nice.
Yes, it would, yeah.
Yeah, we've had, I've been involved with the Strategic Forum for Construction, and then that became the Construction Leadership Council.
Yeah.
So I was involved in the first iteration of CLC. And the number of construction ministers we've had from both Labour and Tory has been just absurd. Yeah. It's just demonstrated a complete lack of interest in construction. So if we get a focus at all, I'll be very pleased.
Yeah.
That said, this government has got some very bold ambitions for what our industry has got to do. So housing, which you'll know intimately, producing 300,000 units a year or 370,000 units a year, depending on which figures you're going to take. Phenomenal aspiration.
Goal. Yeah.
And at the time, the figure I always repeat is that in the 1970s, when we were producing this number of houses, there were more bricklaying apprenticeships than there are total construction apprentices today.
Really? I didn't know that.
So, most of these houses are still going up with bricks. We've got the ability to put some technology in there, but
it just goes to show that really the skilled labour is the bottleneck, shall we say?
I think it's one of the bottlenecks.
One of the bottlenecks,
and I think we've got to get the skills right. I think we've also got to get mortgage advisors comfortable with some of the technology.
Yeah, some of the different construction details.
Yeah. I think we've also got to solve the retrofit problem, which we haven't done yet.
Yeah.
We haven't yet been able to convince the general market that we know enough about the retrofit, that the value of doing retrofit is going to repay itself either in terms of energy or carbon.
Well, we've had a very keen look at Victorian terraces, there's, I think it's 6 million Victorian terraces in this country, which generally these days I think that it's a bit of a starter home. People like, if they can buy a semi or something that's a new build by one of the big national house builders, they tend to go for that.
Yep.
Rather than a mid-terrace Victorian property. But we love them, and if you just get the retrofit right, and you give them the love and attention that they need to, you can really get a really aspirational property out of a Victorian terrace.
Yeah.
I mean, look at London, some of those places.
Well, my first house was a terrace house, Victorian terrace.
Yeah.
But you need to understand how buildings work.
Yes.
So if you're going to go and do the retrofit on a solid no cavity wall, you need to understand the ventilation in the roof's really important.
The ventilation, the ground floor, what you're going to do with the ground floor. Yeah.
So technically, you need to understand how these buildings work and how these operate, and that's, I think, one of the challenges. Again, comes back to skills on retrofit, is making sure we've got the teams of people who really do understand that you can't just paper over the air bricks and
In our last conversation, I spoke a little about the planning system, the regulatory framework, and the wider sort of administrative landscape in which our industry operates, and the somewhat obstructive effects that it can have on the sort of continuation of business and developments and so on. I riffed on it last time, so I thought I'd give you some airtime.
I'll try not to riff on it, because I only to say that the NFB is active in trying to get some of this awareness of some of the downsides of lack of planning, and one of my other hats is the Solar Task Force, and we've been talking to the planners there about getting planning for some of the large scale solar farms that are out there. And there's absolutely no doubt that the civil servants in London get it.
They know.
They absolutely understand that a 1 month delay in a planning application is a 1 month delay on economic activity.
Yes.
It's also a 1 month increase in costs and making the industry that much less efficient.
Yeah.
And they get it. They absolutely
undeveloped
understand
sites are a risk to all stakeholders.
Well, that's not necessarily central government's problem.
No, it's not.
That's the local authorities'
Yes.
challenge to make sure their communities are safe. But in terms of central government, they get it. The challenge is that it's a devolved responsibility to the local authorities, and as such, they are not in a position to intervene wholeheartedly. Now, we should wait and see what this government comes up with, because if they're going to achieve 300,000 houses a year, I suggest to me that they've got some ideas on how planning is going to change.
It can't be done without some kind of reform.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And so let's wait and see what they come up with.
Yeah.
In terms of local authority planning, the challenge on local authorities is that they can't afford to pay what the private sector can pay. The local authorities pay or train quite a lot of people, and then they get, as soon as they're any good, they get pinched by private sector.
Yeah.
So there are some challenges around about that. But again, there's no easy answers to solving the problem, because I think none of us want to do away with the planning process.
No.
We have to leave a way the local communities can just have a say in what gets built in their communities.
Well, I mean, you only have to look at places in the world that don't have planning policies and look at what is produced and how disjointed it is, and how the infrastructure doesn't meet the requirements of what is being built and so on. So yeah, I think that anyone with any sense is grateful for a robust planning system. For me, it's about
it's got to work.
It's got to work. It's got to be cohesive,
and
it's got to have at least. See, this is where I think that the central government should have a role. Is that it's fine for local authorities and the individual policies that are being made to be in place, but then there needs to be a holistic top-down view. So if two policies are juxtaposed to each other, something needs to be.
I mean, I think that's so the National Federation bills have done well in terms of stopping local authorities impose overly onerous green conditions on.
Yes.
So we've had some success with that.
There was a ministerial statement given by Lee Rowley and Baroness Penn in December last year, which was a big win.
Yep. So that works. But we've seen the reintroduction of mandatory housing targets now into this government, which I think is going to solve some of those problems that you allude to. I think you have to allow different authorities to have different priorities in how they're built. What they shouldn't be doing is competing against that national that area target they're going to be given. And so I think that those targets themselves will have to drive quite a lot of deliverability around what we're trying to do. The trick is, I think, for us is to make sure that it unlocks the smaller regional house builders who are generally the people who train. So
that does bring me on to my next question, which is that we are seeing, and we're not the only industry that's seeing this, but the larger corporate, national and international companies seem to be consolidating a lot of the industry at the moment in almost an anti-competitive way, and SMEs are really quite struggling. I think that might be part of where you were going with that conversation, is to say that unlocking SMEs will help.
We have to find a way of getting those on that SME house, the local developer who might do only 10 units a year, might do 20 units a year, but they're the bedrock of training for the people throughout the sector. They're the people who take the apprentices on, the people who look after the people in their local area,
and delivery of the volume of houses that we need. That we were doing 39-40% of new homes in 1987, 8, 9 were built by SMEs, and that's down to 7 or 8%.
And the challenge is that we don't want those homogenous house builders. They're all the same. That variety that comes in with those regionals gives us much more scope and much more.
I call them cookie cutter toy towns. That's what I see. Those big sprawling housing developments where when you go into a car park and you can't see your car. That's how I imagine turning up home in one of those estates fields. You go, which one's my house again? Because they all look the same.
Well, I couldn't possibly comment, but I do know what you mean. But that's the great thing about the SME and the regional contractors, the regional developers, that variety comes in, and you can do that variety on small schemes. Gives
the area a bit of character and a bit of diversity of, the houses on this street are like a bit of a different stylistic theme to the houses on that street, and everything's got a bit of definition to it.
I think it's I'll give you a short story when COVID broke, but I think just use it to demonstrate that I think government does what it can in these scenarios. And when COVID broke, we had the then housing minister, Nadeem Zahawi, gave a talk to the industry once every 2 weeks. And when it first started, I remember the first time he did it, I think there were 18 of us on the call. By the end of the year one, I think we were over 100 people on the call. But very early on, I think it was in May, so the COVID started in March, we got the lockdown in the end of March, and in May we were still locked down. And we had a small house builder from the southwest came onto the call, she said, look, I am building 2 houses in, I can't remember, it was Exeter or somewhere like that. And she said, I can't finish my houses because the banks are pulling my funding. I'm an SME developer. I put everything into these houses. I need to get them finished so that I can get paid and move on to the next ones. Standard classic problems. And she said, I've got the banks have pulled my development funding, and now I'm having my personal overdrafts pulled because I'm using it for funding my these houses. And to be fair to Nadeem Zahawi, he said, I sit down every morning with the managing directors of the big banks, and they categorically tell me this isn't happening. Please can you let me have the name of the bank managers and the name of the banks? And you knew the next morning somebody was going to have their collar felt. Now, history doesn't relate whether she ever got her funding again and was managed to finish the building. But I use this as an example because I think politicians do care about solving some of these problems. The challenge we have is we need to be able to give them some easy answers on how to make these things happen. And the challenge we got on the smaller developers is not one size doesn't fit all.
Correct. Yeah.
There's a whole raft of different things need to be put into just to encourage people to get back into that market, because it's so dependent on all sorts of things. It depends on who they've got in the area, it depends on the funding, depends on the land availability, it depends on planning, it depends on you name it. It's going to have a variability. Whereas you could go to one of the large houses, house builders, and say, right, can you do X, Y, or Z? And it's easier for them to manage that process. So I understand that, but I think everybody would like to see how we can come up with some policies which are going to encourage those SMEs to come back, not least for the training. They always used to train the majority of people who then end up going and working for these volume house builders.
Yeah.
We still need to get those people trained and motivated, and not least because we want some variety in what we live in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. That's what we're all about.
Yeah.
I think every home should be unique.
Well, they always are, because they're full of people, and people are unique.
That's true. Yeah. Mark, thank you for today. It was a wonderful conversation.
Not at all.
Really appreciate your time.
No, it's been really enjoyable, and look forward to seeing how ProBuild proceeds, because I think you've got a real niche market here.
Oh, we appreciate that.
And wish you every success.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Thank you.